Hello, good evening. Thank you for joining us this fairly nice evening here in West Oxfordshire and joining us for this RT workshop brought to you this evening by Astral Aviation Consulting on behalf of the UK Civil Aviation Authority. Those of you that haven't been to these before, haven't met around and about, my name's Matt Lane. I'm going to be hosting, coordinating this evening, ably supported by Nigel Wilson. I'm a head of training and an active single and multi-FI and examiner and a flight instructor course instructor as well. Nigel, over to you to say hello and introduce yourself.
Folks, my name's Nigel Wilson. I'm head of training, instructor and examiner at a couple of training organisations, an ATO and a DTO. And for my sins, I'm also a display pilot, so I get to fly some of the older stuff as well.
Brilliant. Fantastic to have you here with us as ever, Nigel, supporting the workshop this evening. So over the course of the next 90 minutes, we're going to break the workshop down in some easily digestible chunks. Things we're going to cover: ground safety, and there's some interesting stuff in there about pre-takeoff briefs and captain's briefs. Circuit safety, and we'll be interested to get your opinions as well on what's the most misunderstood type of join. And a quiz. Don't worry, you're not going to be scored. Your results won't be logged. It's really just some fun interaction to test yourself at the end as well. So it's nothing hard, but please do stay around for that as well. We'll also wrap up at the end with some Q&A. As we go through tonight, we'd love you to contribute. So if you do have any questions, please add them to the Q&A box, which is a separate one to the chat box. We may also try and pick up some of the questions through the workshop if appropriate and if they relate as to various bits that we're discussing at the time. After the workshop tonight, we'd love you to stay in the loop with events and resources. Please sign up to our mailing list, and you can do this by going to our website, www.astralaviationconsulting.com. And Sophie, who's supporting us tonight on the tech behind the scenes, has just dropped that into the chat box, as well as a link there that you can use. That'll give you access to the replay of this workshop and a whole of a host of safety resources. Now, to kick us off, I'd like to find out, those of you with us tonight, what type of aircraft do you mainly fly? Now, this just gives us a bit of a indicator of the kind of groupings that we've got here tonight, and also it gives you a chance to test out the poll functionality. Now, just to explain as well, if you're watching live, you'll be able to interact with the polls through the Zoom software. If you're watching this as part of a YouTube video replay, you won't be able to interact, but we'll try and structure it so that you can actually test yourself and the answers won't appear straight away. You can also see as well in the chat box people from all over the UK saying hello, so it's great to have you with us. Brilliant to have a great spread, and even somebody from overseas I see there as well. Austria, I think it was, I just saw scroll past. There we go. So first poll, it should have just popped up on your screen. Let us know, what type of aircraft do you mainly fly? So we know a lot of you may fly different aircraft types as well, but let us know what you mainly fly: balloon, glider, fixed wing, flex wing, microlight, single engine piston, multi, helicopter, paramotor, gyrocopter. I was quite rightly reminded, I think I'd forgotten gyrocopter when we did the last one. So the gyro community quite rightly prompted me, so we've got an option there as well. So let's have a look at the results, please, Sophie. So majority of you, 78% single engine piston, and quite a few microlight people and a few glider attendees as well. Brilliant. Let me just have a look. Yes, 2 of the gyro community are here as well. Brilliant. Glad we got that option in there as well. Brilliant to have you with us and your experiences with us tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nigel. Now, just to explain, we're going to do this in 2 sections, Nigel, then myself. There is going to be a fair bit of information. So remember that we all have that link to that YouTube replay, and you'll be able to kind of stop and start and look at things and screenshot as part of the YouTube if you miss anything tonight. So don't worry about that. You will have that option after. Over to you, Nigel.
Okay, thanks, Matt. and maybe we can have the slide up as well. So we're going to cover, or I'm going to cover in this section, just a little bit about getting to the aircraft, starting up, taxiing, takeoff, and departures. So without any further ado, let's move on then. So at the larger airports and airfields, we often need to walk to the aircraft. So let's have a quick think about what's involved and remind ourselves of some of the rules. So first, there may well be some local procedures in place that might prevent us from doing that. And at major airports, we aren't generally allowed to meander around on the foot, on the apron, or any other part of the airside, come to that. And we're often transported in a vehicle to the aircraft, and that's usually with a handling agent and probably a large wedge of money involved as well. So at other airfields, we may well be allowed to walk, but we might need to wear some high-vis clothing. That's not always the case. So check first, and the AIP is your friend there. And if we can have the slide up, Matt, not sure if we're there yet. There's an entry for Gloucester as an example about high-vis clothing required. Just to share something with you as a side, I was once reprimanded for not wearing high vis, and I asked them how they knew that, and they said, well, they saw me. So I just let that sink in for a little bit as well. Okay. Suitably attired, then, we now need to think carefully about how to get to our aircraft, and that there might be some walkways marked out on a big apron as to what the best route is to take, and it may or may not be obvious. But the last thing we want to do is to end up with a 90-ton 747 having to do an emergency stop because we just happen to amble across what turns out to be a taxiway. Apparently, that spills the captain's coffee, and they don't like that. So bottom line is, if we're not sure where to tread, then we ought to sort of ask someone. We need to think carefully about getting the passengers to the aircraft. So non-aviators aren't necessarily aware of the risks nor the rights of way at airfields, and we shouldn't leave them to fend for themselves. We ought to really meet and greet them in the terminal or the car park. And then we can give them the first part of our passenger brief. So passengers, if you think about passengers, they probably have got short memories because it's a new experience for them and they're all keen and eager. So let's give them a bit of time to a bit of info at a time, really, so it can sink in gradually. And maybe humour is a good way of helping remembering things. So keeping it light probably helps. So how about things like stay close to me at all times. I'm a pilot, and I had a shower this morning, so there's no need to keep your distance. All right. Whenever you are on the apron, walk and don't run. Beware of propellers, jet wash, and downwash from helicopters. Now, you might need to explain that, okay, because we all know what we mean, but passengers may not. Never approach an aircraft unless the pilot invites you to do so. And if in doubt when an aeroplane is moving around you, just stand still. Okay, it's more difficult for pilots to hit a moving target. So there's another little sort of thing you can put in. And if you have got children with you, then just keep a good close eye on them. They are even more susceptible to not understanding, the threats that are probably involved there. So if we got to our aircraft with our passengers, then let's assume we've done the sensible thing, and we've actually already done the external pre-flight checks, because we don't really want to leave our passengers hanging around outside the aeroplane, in drizzle and wind and things like that, because airfields are windy places. So let's think about how we're going to put our passengers inside the aeroplane. And that's where we need to think carefully about the second part of the passenger brief. So we need to do that and tell them about how to get out of an aeroplane before we even turn the master switch on. Because who knows, when you turn the master switch on, something might happen and we might need to get out in a hurry if we suddenly have an electrical fire. So the other thing to remember is if you're in an aeroplane that's only got one door, then let's think carefully about the order in which we need to brief people on how to get out, because we really don't want one almighty bun fight on our hands just when something happens and you have to get everybody out and they're all making their way to the door at the same time. So next thing then, how about getting ourselves organised before we taxi? Do we have an up-to-date chart or the layout of the airfield? And if it's a paper chart, did it come from an up-to-date source like the AIP, or are we using a really ancient, guide from Poolies or AFE or something like that? In other words, not an up-to-date one. And if we're using an EFIS system where we've got charts on screen in the aircraft, then is that database up to date? Did we check? Well, hopefully it won't be the first time we've looked at it. So we ought to have done that really in the comfort of our own home or in the departure lounge. So we should be aware of what's going on. So one of the questions I get asked a lot, sort of thinking about the next step really, is, do I need to request start? Well, typically the answer is no if we're a VFR flight and if the AIP doesn't state that we must. So for IFR flights, you generally do request start because that gives ATC a chance to tell us to not start yet because there perhaps has been a delay in our flight plan. But there are some exceptions to the rule, in that some, even small GA airfields, might ask you to request start because they may have parachuting in progress, and they have a procedural rule that actually we don't want any propellers turning while we have parachuters landing on the airfield. So that gives a little bit of time to do some bits and pieces, and it's also useful to try and get some situational awareness of the traffic around us, both in the circuit and on the ground, before we even move off. So how about getting the radio turned on and up and running while we do some of the other checks? It's just there in the background, and we can easily pick up some information. We can see how busy it is, for example, and probably have an idea as to the route that the ATC is going to use to get you to the taxiway. So, taxiways and routes to the runway. It isn't always obvious, especially at bigger airfields, because ATC like to play games with us. No, they don't really. I'm kidding. ATC have got a job to do, and they often put people around different parts of the taxiways to get to the relevant place, either to keep us in the right order, or because they've got other aircraft, exiting or vacating a runway, and it's just their master plan to make sure it all hangs together. There's also some caveats there as well about if we're operating in a low visibility procedure. So, for example, at Gloucester, they actually limit that you can only get to the runway via one entry and exit route, so that they're managing to control those movements on the ground much more strictly, and mainly in an area where they can actually see what's going on from the tower. So, taxiing then. Now we got to this point. So let's look at the taxi chart before we start to move. There's nothing worse than trying to look at your lap with your head down while you're moving along. And repairing aircraft it is an expensive business. The dent doctor probably ain't going to fix the problem if we taxi into somebody. So when we get our taxi instructions, we'll obviously need to read them back. And we usually would write them down as well. And then the next thing to do is let's just move forward 6 inches and let's try the brakes to make sure they work while we have a very slow forward speed. We want to make sure they work now, not when we might need them as we go round a corner and come face to face with someone going the wrong way. So that sort of brings us on to taxi speeds. So generally, at most GA airfields, a fast walking pace is the recommended speed. Now, it's horses for courses. If we're at Heathrow, with massive wide taxiways and we can see forever, then obviously it would be appropriate to taxi at a faster speed. And horses for courses, well, in aviation terms, that's what we call threat and error management. So our speed ought to be appropriate to the conditions and the proximity to obstacles, and other taxiing traffic. So if we're taxiing alongside a hedgerow at a nice green airfield, so to speak, we need to be able to stop if something suddenly appears in front of us, like, a deer running across the taxiway or something like that. Pheasants, by the way, they're absolutely stupid. They're the only bird I know that will try and attack a rotating propeller, and trust me, they don't come off very well. So taxiing then, usually, or at some airfields, there's a central yellow taxiway line, and it's going to be there for a reason. So, and that's to help to ensure that we have necessary wingtip clearance off the taxiways. You know, it's not like a left and a right lane. Our nose wheel should be on that yellow line. In some airfields where there are areas of reduced clearance, or where there historically have been previous problems, then if you look in the AIP on the aerodrome chart, then they're probably marked as hotspots, and then you may be able to see that. Have we got? I'm just double checking because I can't see the the PowerPoint on the screen or the slides on the screen.
Yeah, we're on the taxiing side, Nigel. We're all right.
Excellent, good. That's
we're
fine.
still with you. Don't worry.
Yeah, excellent, good, okay. Taxiing, just be careful, especially where there are those hotspots, because they are known problem areas. So, just be careful if you spot a hotspot, so to speak. Taxi clearances, when we're at a controlled airfield, they have a limit. So we'll need to know the hold points and also the taxiway markings associated with it. But we need to be careful about hold points, because obviously there might be a hold point called Alpha 1 or Alpha 2, and that depends on how far away from the runway the controller would like us to stay. And that's usually involved with, again, low visibility procedures to make sure we stay further away from the runway, so we don't interrupt any of the ILS signals that might be used for an aircraft down and approach. So we talked about taxiing, so let's see how much we remember, shall we? For all that stuff you learnt back in air law and operational procedures. So here's a poll on the screen then. So we're just going to look at this picture first. So if you imagine you're moving left to right on the taxiway below, all right, or on the taxiway that you can see in the picture, and you come across these two sets of lines, what do they mean? Right, so here we go. So it's, you must stop and request a clearance to cross the lines, or you must ensure the way ahead is clear before crossing the lines and state you're doing so, or you may cross the lines during daylight hours without a clearance, or you can proceed across the lines without a clearance and without stating your intentions to do so. So now's your chance to vote with your superior knowledge from that dim and distant air law course that you did ages ago. And let's have a look at the results, shall we?
And Nigel, I've just put an arrow on the screen as well, just to show people which way they're going, for those confused as well.
Excellent, good. Okay, for some reason I'm not seeing the screens, but that's fine, not to worry. So let's have a look at the answers then that you said. So most of you has said you must stop and request a clearance to cross the line. So that's an interesting one if we're traveling left to right, because I'm afraid that's not the right answer. Okay, the correct answer is D, in that going left to right, you are allowed to proceed across the lines without a clearance and without stating your intentions. So basically it means that, think about it when you're driving a car, a dashed line like that is a give way sign, you don't have to stop. Whereas a solid line across a junction that you come across, that means you actually must stop, and it's associated with a stop sign. So had we been coming from right to left, you would have had to stop and request a clearance, or been given a clearance to cross the line. But coming the other direction, then you do not need to stop and you don't need a clearance, and you can just go straight across. Okay, so a few of us have learned a few things there.
And I can guarantee that Nigel and I had a long discussion about this in the prep as well, so you're not alone.
Absolutely. So then, carrying on with taxiing then. So sometimes the hold points can be confusing and congested. So if we have a look at this example here to do with Gloucester on the left-hand side, again, you can see that we've got some hot spots, those red circles, hashed circles there, with areas where we just need to be careful. The other thing to mention during taxiing is the picture on the right. So that's where we have a line of red lights across the taxiway. That's called a stop bar. And the bottom line is you are not allowed to go across a stop bar until you have had a clearance and the lights have been turned off. Okay. Talking about other things then, sometimes our taxi route takes us across a runway. Certainly if we stick to the Gloucester example, that's the case. As you can see there, sometimes you will cross a runway on one of the taxiways. In that case, if we've got strobes, we ought really to have them turned on while we are crossing the runway. That's the rule. The other thing is at big airfields, what happens if we get lost? We've all done it. We're all not quite sure where we are, especially if it's a busy RT environment as well. Well, the bottom line is that if we are on a runway, we mustn't stop. We should keep moving, and we should then ask for instructions while we're keeping on the move. If we're not on a runway, in other words, if we're on a taxiway, then by all means, come to a stop and ask for instructions. So that's the bottom line. If you're on the runway, just make sure you keep moving while you're asking for help. So I'm looking at you in the eyes now, everybody, including me, because I've got me on my screen as well. So are you, or are we, considerate pilots? So let's think about power checks. So when we do the power checks, we really ought to be considerate and think very carefully about the area in which we're doing them, and also what's happening with our prop wash as it blows behind us. So we certainly don't want to perform them in front of a hangar, because the noise echoes around, and also even if the door is shut, debris usually gets blown underneath the door as well, dust and everything else that goes with it. So just be careful about it. The other thing, let's make sure the power checks are performed with our electrical backup fuel pump turned off, because this is the only chance we're going to get to make sure that the mechanical pump is working correctly and with enough oomph, if you like, to deliver the fuel required at higher engine powers. Just a quick word about checklists really here, because if we ever get to the point where we've finished the power checks and then during the pre-takeoff stuff, the checklist says change to, or check, or make sure that the most full tank is selected, now is not the time to change tanks. That's really, really quite a poor piece of checklist terminology, if you like. It ought to say ensure the most fuel tank, or the tank that's got the most fuel in, is already selected. We don't want to suddenly change fuel tanks just before we apply power to take off, because if there is a problem, guess what? We're going to get to 200 or 300 feet and we're going to have an engine failure after takeoff. So mitigation against that, we talked about it in previous sessions, is never change tanks just before takeoff. Make sure you at least do a power check after you've changed tanks before you decide to take off on that tank. Then we've got something called the captain's brief. So some people call it the emergency brief. And there's a big distinction here between the passenger brief and the captain's brief. Captain's briefs is to do with us, the pilot. It's basically a rehearsal of all of the procedures and speeds we might need to use in the next 30 seconds to a minute. And that's, again, just preparing ourselves for stuff that might happen. So we've already got the information at the forefront of our mind, so we don't have to suddenly start thinking about what was that glide speed again, because by then it's probably too late. So if you haven't got a captain's brief written down, it's really useful just to, have a look at one. There's one on the screen. I'm not going to go through it all, but I'm going to point out a couple of things in there. In fact, one thing only, just because of the time, and that's partial power considerations. So don't forget, we talked about that in a previous session as well, about partial power is the main killer rather than a full engine failure. So also remind yourself about what you're going to do in a partial power situation on departure. Taking off then. So we use, or I tend to use a little acronym, comes from the sort of stage world, if you like, is lights, camera, action. So make sure the strobes are on. The camera is to do with the transponder. Think of it like a speed camera if you really want to. That's sort of the methodology. Make sure we're squawking mode altitude and we've got the correct squawk set. And action could be various things depending on what aeroplane you're in. So, a typical one would be, let's put the pitot heat on, let's make sure the fuel pump is turned on, and things like that. So thinking about RT then, might as well just talk a little bit about RT, about what we ought to be familiar with. So things like, we need to be familiar with things like hold position, enter, backtrack, line up, and wait. a conditional clearance such as behind the landing cirrus runway 27 line up and wait behind, cleared for takeoff, and also takeoff at your discretion. Again, we're not going to go through them tonight. We did an RT workshop a while back, and that's now being put into, or the link to that's been put into the chat box now. Talking about departures and takeoffs, then don't forget, if we've done our performance calculations and we've looked at the length of the runway, then that's great. But then if ATC suddenly said, would you like to depart from an intermediate entry point to the runway, think very carefully, because, you know, obviously now we haven't got the same length of runway that we would have had before. It's so easy to do because you're keen to get airborne at that point. So just be careful with performance, you know, and we've all fallen in that trap as well. So departure then, we're finally in the air. Thank goodness for that. So let's, it's not really the time to relax. We ought already to have had a plan and know the route to take with regards to noise abatement. So, you know, we ought to know that before we get airborne. We don't want to then suddenly have to get to 200 feet and suddenly look at a chart to work out whether we need to turn right or left. What altitude should we climb to before we turn? Is it stipulated what altitude might caps, for example, the parachute system, might that become available if you're in a cirrus, for example? And in that situation, again, don't think about heights above ground. Think about what your altimeter shows. So if we're on the QNH and caps is available at 600 feet above ground level and we're taken off from an airfield that's 200 feet high, then think about caps in terms of altitude. So I can use caps above an altitude of 800 feet. So use things in the way that your brain is going to require less processing power, so to speak. Noise abatement, it's not mandatory for GA, but as pilot in command, you know, we can deviate from it if we need to for flight safety. But trust me, you can't make that excuse every single time you fly. So it's not a get out of jail free card for noise abatement. We talked about engine failure after takeoff again. So as part of your own captain's brief and preparation for the flight, you know, why don't you have a look at Google Earth and have a look and see which way it might be best to turn with what side of the, you know, the runway centerline has got the best selection of fields if we do have a problem. So there's not much to think about. In the GA environment, there's not much thought in the GA environment to do with a takeoff alternate, as well as a landing alternate. So we all get to our destination and realize we can't land there, so we divert somewhere else. But how about having a takeoff alternate as well, where if we have a problem after departure, then and then there's a subsequent issue on the runway behind us, then where are we going to divert to in the, you know, in the first phase of flight as well? So think about all of those options as well. That was sort of covered in our takeoff and landing workshop too, so that's now going in the link as well. Think about, you know, are there traffic in the circuit already? Think about where they are, how they will be joining, how we're going to depart the circuit, and also think about other traffic that might not be VFR. IFR traffic could be on an approach, or, you know, coming in another direction, or possibly even using a different runway at an airfield that's got multiple runways. Don't forget that at controlled airfields, ultimately ATC can override any AIP information at any time. So we need to be prepared to think on our feet. You know, deal with something that we're not expecting. So we need to be flexible and have some spare capacity to deal with those things, and often at a high workload time, such as during the departure. So, you know, if we've got our brand spanking new rocket ship aeroplane that we're proud to go and have a fly of, maybe that's not the time to go and do it at a busy airfield unless we've got someone else beside us that can help us, you know, make some sensible decisions if we suddenly get thrown a curveball by ATC or something, you know, something else happens along those lines. So we've got a cracking little quiz coming up with all sorts of questions to remind you of some of the things we've sort of alluded to here. So that's coming a bit later on. So I'm now going to hand over to Matt for some more pearls of wisdom from him.
Brilliant. Thank you as ever, Nigel. We have got some questions that have come in that are quite relevant to the bits you've just done. So I think it's now a good time to
Cool.
pick them up. David has asked, don't you in effect have a clearance by way of taxi instructions? So I think he's talking about the quiz and the question that we did there as well. So I think we kind of answered that, but I think to re-emphasize, David, yes, if you've been cleared to, I don't know, taxi to hold east of Charlie 3, for example, via Alpha, Delta, and Echo, that means you're cleared through those taxiways. What shouldn't happen is that you shouldn't be cleared to a point or a hold that entails you to cross an active runway as part of that full length clearances. So, Nigel, there has been some debate about this in some instances, and that is really ATC ideally should only clear you to a hold point, then you get cleared to cross the runway and then report runway vacated or whatever. But in different places, I don't know what your experience has been, Nigel. Sometimes effectively you do get those clearances to cross other
Yeah,
runways.
yeah. I mean, I think it depends on the length of the taxiway, to be fair. So, ATC are very careful not to overload pilots with too much information or too many items within a clearance. I certainly have had a taxiway clearance to the other side of a runway, and the clearance has include and cross runway 18, but it is a specific clearance to cross the runway as part of the taxi instructions. But 9 times out of 10, like we just said, if you're unsure about something on a taxiway, stop and ask. That's far better than suddenly finding you've got an infringement on your hand because you incurred, or went onto a runway when you shouldn't have done.
And yeah, great. And Robert has asked, where should you do power checks when there's no hard area, the grass is too soggy to access, and there are aircraft behind you on the taxiway? So my initial answer to this would be, hopefully, ideally, the taxiway is wide enough that you can turn in a suitable direction or turn into wind such that your prop wash won't be directed over aircraft that are actually behind you. But if you have to do it without the ability to turn, it's a slightly more difficult one. I think you've just got to be very wary of the other aircraft around you, as Nigel said, and any prolonged high power is going to throw stones and debris over other things. So that's what you really need to avoid. And Nigel, if you got any sage advice on that one?
Totally agree. Even if you can just angle off slightly on the taxiway, it's going to help the prop wash not go over the aircraft behind. And, RT is your friend there. So, if you're in that situation, you've got no choice, then at least you could, talk to either not the aircraft directly behind you, or not the aircraft behind directly on RT, but via the air traffic service unit to say, look, there's nowhere to do the power checks. I am going to have to do power checks here. So can you ensure that I've got, there's a decent amount of distance between me and the aircraft behind? So at least they're forewarned. That's the important thing. And then they can always shout to say, actually, no, that's not going to be acceptable because we're too close.
Absolutely. Somebody's commented as well, taxi instruction isn't a clearance though, question mark. So, well, taxi instructions may include clearances like to cross a runway, but technically speaking, it is an instruction on the ground rather than a clearance, but it is still a mandatory readback because it's an instruction.
Absolutely.
I think, yeah. So yeah, but there is a nuance there. You can have clearances within instructions, potentially, yes, on the ground. And somebody has said, are overhead departures risky, e.g. aircraft may be joining in the overhead? What do you think about that one, Nigel?
Well, yes. So situational awareness all round. So if you are planning on an overhead departure, then really you should, carry either in the circuit or even potentially leave the circuit and get to an altitude to come back to the overhead to then set course. But ultimately, just make your plans clear to everybody on the RT via announcing your intentions, or at a controlled airfield, obviously you'd need to request that you can set course overhead. But yeah, situational awareness for everybody is a key piece of information here. So we all have an idea of where we all are.
Yeah, absolutely. I was at a large, quite busy airfield, and there was a pilot air traffic were expecting him to depart straight ahead and go en route, and actually turned downwind and departed from the end of the downwind leg, which created a little bit of chaos with inbound radar traffic. So it would have been fine if he'd asked to do that and been cleared to do that, because the radar controller could sequence it and know what was happening. Yeah, so yeah, cooperation, coordination is always the key thing. Yeah. Excellent. So thank you for that, Nigel. We'll move on to circuit safety. Going to cover a few things, as you can see there, about pre-arrival, arrival, joins, a bit about circuits, and then just a bit of caution about mixed traffic and wake turbulence, bit of a reminder to all of us about those as well, and just mentioning the subject of going around, which always creates a bit of debate as well. So pre-arrival. You should always be planning to follow any specific arrival procedures published for the aerodrome, just like the departure, as Nigel said. Some aerodromes will nominate a visual reference point for the arrival route, and you may have got this information by a PPR, AIP, commercial information, or even just a website that talks about pilot information. But whatever you use, make sure it's an authorized and up-to-date source, and you check regularly. I mean, things do change more than you think. Just this year, for example, at Oxford, it's had totally new taxiways, totally new taxi procedures, and totally new holds and naming points. So things do change. And I did a test at a flying club a few weeks ago, and the aircraft had got one of these spiral-bound commercial guides in there as well. So I had a quick look at it as we were taxiing out, just out of interest. Oh, it's interesting. It's in, you know, in the little pocket down on the right-hand side. It was 8 years out of date. So if you're using that information, you know, it's quite out of date. So if you've got things like that hanging around, it's probably best to get them in the bin and get a new one if you need one, or print the latest information. Radio contact with the aerodrome, you're looking at really wanting to do that about 10 minutes prior to arrival, ideally. And on initial contact, you're generally looking to obtain and hopefully get past runway news, circuit direction, and either the QNH or the QFE as appropriate. I recommend completing descent or airfield arrival checks, might be FRIDA or something more for detail for complex types. Try and get those checks out of the way in good time, because what you want to do is concentrate on your lookout and integration with other traffic on the join. And to increase visual conspicuity, you may also want to think about turning on landing lights when approaching the airfield as well. You may also be able to build some situational awareness on other traffic by studying your electronic conspicuity picture, if you've got such a thing available on your tablet or similar. But if you're going to do that, remember, don't get heads down. And remember, not all traffic may be displayed on there, so it may be only giving you part of the picture. At controlled airfields, you'll normally be instructed to join in a particular manner, such as join overhead or join downwind. At uncontrolled aerodromes, you might have to plan your arrival join yourself, taking into account local procedures and the prevailing traffic situation. Announce your entry to the ATZ and joining intentions. Know the circuit height, and remember that may vary, may be dependent day of the week or aircraft type, might be microlight circuits, fixed wing circuits, or similar. And if you've got an ATIS, it's sometimes useful to put that in your initial call with the information letter and the QNH you've copied. Now, some airfields actually specify that even in the ATIS on the initial call. So quite a few things to do, like I say, pre-arrival. On the arrival, you know, let's think about some of the things we need to think about when joining that circuit. You've got to give way to existing circuit traffic. You've really got to maintain a good lookout, and you've got to conform to the standard circuit pattern. And try and think about how the visual picture of the runway should be appearing from your aircraft at stages of the flight. As I've already mentioned, you've got to announce your position at standard points, and you can also do that when you think it's going to enhance the situational awareness of others. So it may be that you have to announce you're on base leg or late downwind or something like that if you need to amplify those calls. And always make position calls, even if you think there's no other traffic operating at the airfield. And if there's no air ground service or AFIS, maybe make blind calls on the frequency. And remember, non-radio aircraft are always a possibility at smaller, uncontrolled airfields as well. If you're in doubt, as Nigel keeps reminding us as well, and you've got assistance there from air traffic or a unit, you know, just ask, try and confirm your understanding. Don't be afraid to use plain English. if applicable. You know, AFIS or Airground cannot issue instructions, but they should be able to help clarify local procedures. And just a further word about unattended aerodromes. You may have to use SafetyCom, which 135.480 is the 8.33 frequency on that as well. But I recommend you give the consideration to some of the safety implications of arriving at an unattended airfield as well. You may want to nominate a responsible person who can notify authorities or proceed to the aerodrome to check if you don't make contact after an estimated arrival time as well. Some of my friends, when they're flying, you know, away or going back to their home strip, they have a procedure with their partner that they will, you know, WhatsApp within, you know, half an hour of expected landing, and if not, they should chase up and things like that. So you may want to consider some kind of procedure like that with a friend or somebody suitable. Carrying an ELT or a PLB, which is mandatory for Part 21 aircraft anyway, that's also really advisable procedure there as well. Now, we will, the overhead join. Be interested to get people's comments in the chat box, because this generates so much debate all of the time. We've covered this in lots of other workshops as well, so I'm not going to talk through it in detail. You'll be happy to know. All I would say is that it's like a roundabout in the sky. You just need to go around it in the right direction. And the other thing that I'd like to emphasize to people as well is you don't have to descend dead side straight away. If you think there is a threat in terms of other traffic, or you can't integrate, or you're unsure of the circuit direction or unsure of some procedures, you can stay in the overhead and continue orbiting until you're happy to commit to that descent on the dead side. So as it says there, begin letdown on dead side if safe. Okay, if unable to ascertain runway news, consider circling in the overhead. So like I say, don't feel committed, don't feel rushed in order to descend on the dead side. And that's one of the key things that sometimes people forget with the overhead join there. Other joins, there's a downwind join we can do. So what are the type of things we may want to think about on some of these joins? It's important to observe for conflicting traffic on a downwind join, especially aircraft that may be coming from the crosswind leg. And if you're in doubt about cutting in front of another aircraft, reduce speed or maneuver behind. And the danger is that you join close to the runway and then turn base inside other traffic without realizing. So if you're on a downwind join, awareness of that other traffic is really key. The crosswind join, that's joining at the circuit height from the dead side at about 90 degrees to the runway. Quite a useful join. You then turn downwind to join the circuit direction, but watch out again for traffic established on the downwind leg, or especially traffic that may be in the initial climb out as you cross the upwind threshold area. Base leg join, that's again joining directly to the base leg of the circuit. Watch the downwind leg again very carefully, and ensure you've not joined inside any other traffic that's already on the base leg as well. I did see that once at an airfield. Aircraft joined on base leg and kind of turned left there onto final and went belly up to another aircraft, also turning from base leg to final as well. So which can put both in a very nasty situation. And I can see some comments coming on about that, which we will pick up later on. So it's great to see people's experiences on those. Thank you. Straighten approaches is the other one, not really recommended because they don't give much opportunity to observe conflicting circuit traffic. However, if you're doing a radar join or an instrument approach, that may be where you're coming in anyway. But if you are making a straight in visual approach, you want to report long final about 4 nautical miles, final 2 nautical miles as well. So what we're going to do, just to get the interaction going again as well, is let's have a look at another poll. So what type of join do you most often fly? There's no right or wrong answer on this. We're just interested to see. So the choices are overhead, straight approach, downwind, crosswind, or base. So let us know, what type of join do you most often fly? Let's have a look at the results, please. Okay, let's have a look at the results there. Okay, so we've got about 58% for overhead joins, quite a few downwind joins, and quite a few crosswinds. So it's quite a spread of joins there as well. That's quite interesting, but quite a lot still using the overhead join as well. And Franco, I think, has commented from Italy. Hello. You tend to join the downwind or base with an angle of 45 degrees. Nigel, I think that's an FAA American, very much a US pattern type join, as some people have commented, I think, isn't it? That's quite common in the US, I believe.
It is quite common in the US. It's got its benefits because you know you have more chance of seeing the other traffic both on crosswind and also on the downwind leg already, because you're not immediately behind them or at 90 degrees to them. You know, you get some other angle, and your peripheral vision is able then to pick up the movement a bit easier.
Great. No, thanks, Nigel. Not something that I see regularly or at all used in the UK at all. For reason, I don't know why it's never one, but it's not something. But no, thank you for those comments. That's very good. And let's have a look then at the circuit. What do I mean by the circuit? Well, we all kind of talk about it, but we're talking about the flight pattern that aircraft make around the aerodrome or the airfield when taking off or landing. And there's a few rules that I'd like to highlight relative to this. If you really want to know them, rules 10, 11 and 12, and it's the UK Rules of the Air Regulation 2015. We've discussed the circuit positions and RT in a number of workshops. We've got the links to those earlier, so I'm not going to go over those in depth, but please, if you have any particular questions, put them in the Q&A and we will try and pick those up as well. But CIRA, which is it's standard European rules there, but it's adopted into UK regulation. It's 3225 if you ever really want to Google it or look it up as well. And they apply regardless whether there's an ATZ or not as well. Sometimes people don't understand that as well. So some things you've got to do. You've got to observe other traffic for the purpose of avoiding collision. You've got to conform with or avoid the pattern of traffic formed by other aircraft. So that's about you having to fit in with other traffic circuit. And except for balloons, all turns have got to be the left when approaching for a landing or taking off, unless otherwise indicated by the aerodrome. So when it means otherwise indicated, that's talking about whether there's instructions published or instructions from an RT facility. And except for balloons, land off and take into wind unless safety or other operational considerations determine otherwise. So what that's talking about is if you're maybe at a grass airfield with a particular slope or particular obstructions, you might not be landing directly into wind. You might accept a tailwind, for example, there as well. Couple of other rules as well. Rule 10, I'll let you Google these and look them up. That's about not landing on a runway that's occupied by another aircraft unless authorized by an air traffic control unit. And here's a freebie, just hold on to that for later as well. And then once you've landed, if you're a powered aircraft, you must move clear of the landing area as soon as possible. Okay. Rule 11, which often creates some debate as well, but that's all about if you're equipped with RT, information on the aircraft's position and height must be transmitted upon entering or leaving the ATZ. And if there is an AFIS, an air ground service, you've got to have got appropriate information from that unit to allow the flight to be conducted safely within the ATZ. So that's just about establishing those communications there as well. And rule 12 is about taxiing, and you must not taxi on a maneuvering area of an uncontrolled aerodrome without the permission of either the person in charge or the AFIS unit if notified. Now, that permission is usually implied by operating in accordance with normal procedures and any local terms and conditions that may apply. So what that's all about is, if there's procedures published for an uncontrolled airfield on the ground, you need to follow them. That's what it's all about there. So just a few rules that you may have forgotten about or may want to refresh yourselves on there as well. There's some questions coming in as well about RT. We will pick those up as well, don't worry. Now, a couple of other safety considerations I just want to cover. Mixed traffic wake turbulence. There have been several fatal accidents, sadly, in the UK and overseas to light aircraft because pilots lost control after being caught in the wake vortex or helicopter downwash from heavier aircraft. And it really is a hazard for light aircraft. You know, all aircraft generate vortices at the wingtips as a consequence of producing lift. So it's physics. But the heavier the aircraft and the slower it's flying, the stronger that vortex is. Low altitudes, these vortices can persist for as long as 80 seconds. In very light or calm winds, up to 2.5 minutes, they can be there. And once they've formed, they will continue to descend until they decay or reach the ground, as you can see in that diagram there as well. Crosswinds can carry these vortices away from the flight path of the aircraft as well. And that descent for about every nautical mile behind an aircraft, the vortices will typically descend about 100 to 200 feet. So again, if you're flying an aircraft behind or crossing behind a larger aircraft, you need to think about that, even though you may be considerably lower than the larger aircraft as well, because the vortices that descend them, you may still encounter them there as well. Now, the CAA, there's loads of detailed information about aircraft weight categories and the separation which controllers are required to provide. There is a Safety Sense Leaflet 15. It's one of the old ones. It's not one of the newer ones that's been redone and republished, but there's still some really good information in there as well. And there's an AIC that talks all about wake turbulence as well. The links just gone in the chat box. They're really worth having a read and refreshing yourself on, especially if you haven't operated near and in and around big aircraft recently. Quick example, PA-28, a Warrior, Cherokee, similar. It's a light category. Following an A320, Airbus A320, in the UK, that's a lower medium category. So separation, 5 nautical miles on final approach, 3 minutes on departure from an intermediate rotation point. So that's the kind of distances that you need to be giving. So they're quite large, really, when you think about it. Now, I'd also just like to mention wake turbulence from rotary aircraft. In forward flight, the downwash from the main rotors of the helicopter it's formed into a pair of trailing vortices similar to wingtips of a fixed-wing aircraft. But also, when hovering or whilst air taxiing, the helicopter this directs a really forceful blast of air downwards, and that air rolls out in all kinds of directions, as you can see on the photo there as well. And this can really create problems on the parking area and to mixing it in with light aircraft. And there's a real risk of damage as well, not only to the aircraft being blown around or blown over, but to fixed-wing control runs and surfaces being blown around by helicopter downwash. I know of a couple of recent instances where aircraft has had the controls slapped against the stops by a helicopter hovering taxiing past, had to have some maintenance inspections. And a friend of mine a couple of years ago was actually blown. He was doing his power checks at an airfield. Helicopter hover taxied behind them, and they got blown onto the propeller and the wingtip, and caused damage to the propeller, engine shock loaded, and so on. Nobody's fault. It was what happened. So what does the guidance recommend? You should avoid operating within 3 rotor diameters of any helicopter in a slow hover taxi or a stationary hover. And as a guide, if the skids or wheels of the helicopter are off the surface, then it's going to be producing that kind of downwash. Okay, so definitely have a think about that, and I'd be interested in the chat if people have got experiences of mixing in and around rotary, or maybe some of the rotary or helicopter pilots on here have a thought about that as well. Finally, a word on going around. Now, it may be necessary to discontinue an approach or carry out a go around. It could be for air traffic reasons, or it could be because you've misjudged the approach. If you do need to go around, you should initiate it so as not to go beyond, too low a height as well. You may want to set some kind of personal minima, or your school may set some kind of minima on that. But the general procedure is as follows: look out ahead, apply full power, prevent yaw, level the wings, and don't worry about where this initially points you. Being wings level is really important to achieve the maximum climb performance. And then you should need to select, hold, and trim the takeoff attitude. Accelerate up to climbing speed. And when you have a positive rate of climb, raise the flap gear as well if appropriate. Confirm the flap has travelled up, and prevent the nose from pitching up and be prepared to trim there as well. And when you're safely in the climb, keep a good lookout and gently maneuver the aircraft on the dead side and re-establish in the circuit. And notice I mentioned there about confirm the flap has travelled or the flap has gone up as well. There has been a couple of nasty instances as well where pilots have thought they've selected flap and it hasn't travelled, or it's tripped out or not travelled, or they've misselected the trim, and they're then trying to climb away at high nose attitude with a lot of drag flap down and got into difficulties. So it is important to make sure the flap is where you want it to be. Final discussion point of mine, go around's not just a maneuver from the final approach. You can go around at any point in the circuit. Basically, all you need to do is recover the aircraft back to circuit height if you're not already there, and continue the pattern at circuit height. So for example, from the base leg, you would climb back to circuit height, fly the pattern, moving over to the dead side when slightly abeam the threshold, and then from the downwind leg, continue the pattern. So you can go around at any time. Don't think you have to descend to low level and final before going around as well. Now, we can debate this as well, but generally going around is preferable to orbiting in the circuit or extending downwind, which ideally we want to try and avoid unless directed to by air traffic. But remember, if air traffic are then directing you to do it, they're responsible for managing the sequencing. Has been some debate recently in Chirp and some of the other safety publications about orbits in the circuit as well. There was a nasty incident some years ago with a student who got into difficulties orbiting in the circuit with the flap down as well. And there's been some debate recently about air traffic asking students and low-out pilots to orbit there as well. What I would say is if you're uncomfortable with it, again, use plain language. Speak to air traffic if you've been asked to do something that you're not sure about or you're not comfortable with, especially at low level there as well. But that is a bit of a summary about the circuit. We've got a few questions that I'm going to pick up now as well. Nigel, any thoughts about orbiting in the circuit or air traffic asking people to do that?
Well, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. If you're uncomfortable doing it, then along with anything that ATC asks you to do that you cannot comply with or you don't want to comply with, then you must stay that you cannot comply. And they will usually come up with a separate plan. So, you're the one at the sharp end in the aeroplane having to do this task. If you're not comfy doing it, then simply don't do it. Yeah.
Brilliant. And Jane has commented she should have done a go around a few weeks ago. It's definitely, you always got to be prepared to go around there as well. There you go. Somebody has also commented, had somebody request a straighten approach while he was doing an overhead join. They got lost and we were advised to try an overhead join next time. Yeah. So there is a danger with an overhead join. A straighten approach. There is some airfields that are quite close to each other and have the same runway directions, and people have landed at the wrong airport doing straight-in approaches. It has happened as well. And Franco in Italy has commented, yes, in Italy they consider the straight-in approach not very safe in terms of collisions. So absolutely there as well. Peter said, my understanding, stay left of the runway when going around. Nigel, correct me wrong. I think the point is when you're going around, ideally you want to step slightly to the dead side. So it depends on what the circuit direction is, I think.
Yeah, you need to keep the runway in view if you can. So that means that the pilot sits on the left, so you need to be on the right hand side of the runway usually. Just to observe the other traffic that's underneath you. That might be the reason why you're going around in the first place. Yeah.
Brilliant. We've got some cracking questions coming. It's all related to this, so I am going to pick them up now. So the quiz may be a bit later. So the Q&A we might be doing now, so we might not have much Q&A at the end as well. But they're really cracking questions related to them now. So I think it's a good time to do them. Somebody has asked, what if most or all of the dead side is a noise abatement area? Yes, I know of some airfields like that, and hopefully they've got procedures published. I'm trying to think of one where you actually let down, is it Wickham Airport, where you actually let down overhead the runway at a height and then only descend once you're on the crosswind leg, I think. Nigel, have you ever come across one of those?
I've Old Buckingham springs to mind, where there is no overhead joins allowed for that very reason. So you have to join generally on the downwind leg, or you're not even allowed to join in the standard crosswind leg. You know, they like downwind joins just to keep the noise away from the airfield.
But yeah, but do try and avoid noise abatement. But as Nigel said in his talk, you know, for safety reasons, if you need to go over a noise abatement area, that's preferable. You know, if you're trying to position to space behind another aircraft or avoid another aircraft, you know, make you know, fly over the noise abatement area. It's far better than putting yourself in a steep overbank descending turn, or you know, getting too close to another aircraft. Nigel's said, going around in a right-hand circuit, surely better to go on live side to maintain a view of the runway. Well, I think really we should be just going on the dead side, really. But I accept that. I know where you're coming from, I think, because I've done this myself. I've done this recently, and I think if you're in the left-hand seat and you're trying to keep visual on an aircraft that is taking off and you're going around, I would agree with you, Nigel. Yes, step over just a bit onto the live side, because keeping visual on the taking off aircraft is more important than stepping over. I think that's what you're getting at. Would you agree with that, Nigel?
Absolutely, safety comes first. Yes, so if you need to keep eyes on an aircraft, then put yourself in the position where you can do so. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thoughts on overtaking a slower aircraft in the circuit, e.g. gyrocopters, from Ian? Oh, that's a cracker one. I'm going to defer to you, Nigel, here. What do you think? Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, so technically, the textbook answer is you shouldn't overtake them. You should go around. So if you're coming up to an aircraft, then you should go around. If obviously it's at the beginning of the downwind leg, then situation awareness is key. So you might like to talk to them via the ATSU about that. In which case you would need to overtake them on the correct side to keep in line with air law. But you know, if there is a huge discrepancy in the speeds, then yeah, you're going to have a problem. So maybe dare I say, we should have thought about that before we joined the circuit and given our spacing a little bit more, made our spacing a little bit more generous. So technically, you need to go around in the way that Matt said. You can go around at any point in the circuit. So on the downwind leg, you can go around. So you would go, you know, above that traffic and remain in the circuit around the circuit pattern once more. So that's my view on it.
Brilliant. No, agree, Nigel. And Ian's asked, right-hand circuit. I'm using my hands in the bios and figure this out. Right-hand circuit. I'm on base when an unannounced twin join on final, somebody else on dead side. Where best to go? Actually, my advice there is, if you're concerned about other traffic and what they're doing, I have actually in that situation, I've just either done a 180 or a left turn, whatever's appropriate, and just actually gone and left the circuit. There has been occasions where if there's other joining traffic, you can't see where to flit in. Sometimes you could turn and leave the circuit, or in that case, you're probably best if the aircraft's on dead side to climb and then go around and climb, or just go around and go back to the overhead even. Certainly, I don't know what you think, Nigel. Sometimes it's better to just go away and rejoin.
It's often the safest option, put it that way. So yeah, and gives yourself some thinking time as well.
Yep, good. And some comments on Leeds and a couple of other areas that have got no overhead join. I think somebody asked about left-hand circuit, go around, right-hand side as gliders operating. What's best then? Hopefully, if that's the case, there may be some airfields have no dead side published because of gliding or because of rotary. Trying to think of another example. I think Wickham, there's somewhere else I'm thinking specifically says no dead side join due to, or no dead side due to rotary traffic. Is it Gloucester? There's fewer places, isn't there, Nigel? Yeah.
There's one or two. But important bit is forearmed is forewarned. So have that information before you get there. So look up the airfield, look up the join procedures before you even depart your takeoff airfield.
And somebody's put a link to the Canadian VFR joining procedures. That's very interesting. Thank you. I shall have a look. I've never flown in Canada personally, so I'll see what they do. And final question I'm going to answer. When joining left base at a large airport, when do you call left base? Circuit left base or aligned left base outside the circuit? Nigel, I think it's when joining left base, when do you call it circuit or aligned left base out? Okay, do you want to take that one? Yeah, I think I know what it's getting at.
In my book, left base is at the end of the downwind leg or when you turn left. So if you're already coming in towards the left base leg, you're not actually on left base until you are in the same position as where someone would have made that turn from downwind onto left base. So actually you're outside of the circuit. So if that's how you're joining, you would need to give way to the guys that are on downwind ahead of you. So you need to be careful with that one.
Brilliant. Absolutely great set of questions. That's brilliant as well. Yeah, Nigel obviously runs his Easy PPL exam school there as well. And I think some of these attendees tonight are trying to test your knowledge on the fly, Nigel. So you survived. Well done. So let's move into the quiz then. Like I say, this is not, we don't take any answers. There's no recording of IP addresses or anything like this. This is just to wrap up some of the things we've talked about and have a thing. So question 1, and Sophie should be able to run the polls alongside us. Please. Thank you, Sophie. What UK wake turbulence category is an ATR 72 regional turboprop? So have a guess. What do you think it is? ATR 72. So it's not the kind of thing you might commonly come across when you're flying. Not going to leave you too long, but we've got a choice there: medium, small, light, or large. What do you think? Let's have a look at the answers, please. Medium, small, light, large. So we've got quite a spread of answers. It is actually a small. So believe it or not. So like I say, medium, you're probably getting up to A320 size as well. So there we go. Like I say, UK wake turbulence, they're adapted from those of ICAO. And the UK puts some more categories. It does lower and upper medium there as well. So UK is slightly different as ever on wake turbulence, but have a read of the ARC and those links about that as well. Nigel, do you want to ask this next one?
Yeah, so here we are. Question number 2 then. So we can have the poll straight away, I think, just to save some time. So you are in a PA28 following that same ATR 72, but this time on arrival. So what spacing should you allow? Is it A, 2 minutes? Is it B, 2 nautical miles? C, 4 nautical miles? Or D, 4 minutes? So we've got a mix of minutes and miles there. So I think that's probably enough time. So let's have a look and see what people said. And the answer is most people said 2 minutes. Okay, so actually the correct answer is C. It's 4 nautical miles, and that's for a light aircraft following a small aircraft. So just quickly then, arrival separation is expressed in distances. So if you think about it, 4 nautical miles is quite a decent distance. That's certainly outside of an ATZ. So just bear that one in mind. Over to Matt for the next one then.
Brilliant. Yes. Okay. Here's another safety one. What's the blood alcohol limit for pilots? And as an example, driving is 80 milligrams per 100 milliliters of blood. So we've got a choice here. Is it 80, 20, 40, or 60? So remember, 80 is the driving blood alcohol limit. What do you think it is for pilots? 80, 20, 40, or 60? And again, well, I can assure you we're not recording this, don't worry. Wow, look at that. Great answers. Yes, indeed. Most 81% of you went for 20. It is 20. And that comes from the Railways and Transport Safety Act 2003. It sets the limit blood alcohol 20 milligrams for those activities carried out by aircrew and air traffic controllers. And it's all about aviation related functions there as well. Now, remember, this is about aviation related functions. So if you're a flying instructor supervising the student, that would count. If you're operating an air ground radio, that would count as well. So maybe something to think about. And somebody's made a comment about Christmas and Christmas meals. Yeah, definitely getting into that season. I don't want to think about that yet. Nigel, question 4.
Okay, here we go. So, what's the typical cabin noise level in a typical light aircraft? So here we go. 80 to 90 decibels, 40 to 50, 20 to 30, or 100 to 110. So let's have a look at the results then. Yeah, well done, everybody. So most of you got that right. It is indeed 80 to 90. So that's why hearing protection is recommended by the UK HSE. And they recommend it as those who are working in noise levels between 80 dB, which is the lower action level, and 85 dBs must be provided with suitable hearing protection on request. So, where noise levels exceed or reach 85 dB, which is the upper action level, then suitable hearing protection must be supplied and worn. So if you haven't got any noise cancelling headsets, then now's the time to go and buy them. But certainly you need a headset of some sort, which certainly attenuates the noise level. Okay, back to Matt.
Question 5. This might stimulate a bit of debate. When do we need to carry an active CO detector? That's in carbon monoxide. On all flights, not required in GA aircraft, at captain's discretion, or whenever a passenger is on board. So have a think about that. Or all flights, not required, captain's discretion, or whenever a passenger is on board. What do people think? Let's have a look at the answers on that, please. Yes, the spread. Okay, so yes, the actual answer, well, whenever we carry a passenger, and that is from the 1st of January 2025. There's a new safety directive that's just come out. The CA have just updated it to version 2. It came out on the 30th of August, talking about mandatory action about active carbon monoxide detectors of piston engine aircraft. So we slipped this question in late in this. If you haven't had a read of it, this is all about there's now a mandate to carry an active CO detector from 1st of January next year with passengers on board. There's certain exemptions in terms of single seat aircraft, aircraft with open cockpit, aircraft performing aerobatics and things like that. Strongly recommend that you carry one now as well. And yeah, so there's various exemptions, but do have a read of that because there is a mandate coming there as well. And that's for piston engined aircraft. Okay. Question 6, Nigel.
Okay, here we go then. So what terminology is used on the RT when initiating a practice engine failure after takeoff? Is it a practice pan, a practice engine failure after takeoff, or IFATO? Is it Plato, or is it fan stop? So what call should we make for a practice or just before we initiate a practice engine failure after takeoff? Let's see what people have said then. Yep, again, most people have that correct. It is the term fan stop. So it is fan stop. It's not practice fan stop. It is the word fan stop. And it just means I'm initiating a practice engine failure after takeoff. And it's only used by pilots of single engine aeroplanes, single engined aircraft, I should say. So next question to Matt, then off we go.
What is a run in and brake? Is it an unapproved maneuver, an airshow arrival, military circuit joining procedure, or join from an instrument approach? What is a run in and brake? So unapproved maneuver, airshow arrival, military circuit joining, or join from an instrument approach. What do people think? Let's have a look at the results on that, please. Yeah, most of you got it right. A military circuit joining procedure, often military bases, and it involves flying the aircraft at circuit height or just below alongside the runway at high speed. And at some point, usually a beam the threshold, the aircraft makes a fairly sharp turn or brake to either the left or right. And during that turn, the aircraft loses speed, configured for landing, and it puts the aircraft onto the downwind leg. Aircraft then turns base and final before landing as normal as well. Comes from, like I say, military background there as well. But something, a type of join you may come across depending where you're flying. Nigel, question 8.
Okay, so RT question, here we come. You're flying into a small airfield with no published frequency, and you elect to use SafetyCom 135480. So what call should you make when you're left hand downwind? Obviously, in this case, the airfield's called small field. So is it small field radio, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta downwind left hand runway 27, or is it small field traffic, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta downwind? Small field, Golf Charlie Delta, downwind 27, small field. Or is it small field traffic, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, left hand downwind 27, small field? So, bit of a mouthful, that one. Hopefully people have made their choices, so let's have a look. And well done. Yeah, that's a big majority there. So well done, everyone. It's the last one here. So basically, stating our intentions, we have to use the prefix and suffix of the airfield we're using, both, in other words, both at the beginning and the end. And that's because, obviously, with SafetyCom, it's a common frequency, and there might be another airfield just down the road called something else with circuit traffic as well. And that's how you distinguish between, the calls coming in for each of those individual airfields by making sure the name is included in it front and back. Okay, Matt, then next one.
Question 9, again a bit more wordy, but let's give it a go. You're inbound to an airfield, you've been cleared to join on right base runway 26, and the approach controller tells you to contact blah 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 tower on 119.155. What should your initial call to that new frequency be? Blah 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 tower, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta with you joining right base 26. Blah 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 tower, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, or Golf blah 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 tower, Golf Charlie Delta with you 119.1155, or tower Charlie Delta right base. What do you think? Have a read of those options. So you're inbound, you've been cleared to right base runway 26, and then the approach controller says contact blah 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 tower on 119.155. What should your initial call be? So let's have a look at the results, please. Bit of a spread, but the correct answer is B. Contact means established communications with. So your details have been passed already, either by strip or electronic means or by landline from the approach controller to the tower controller. So you don't need to add any of that information. You just need to establish contact. And this is one of Darren, our team air traffic controller, one of his things that he actually measured a lot of the extra onerous people, and he worked out, there was minutes and minutes and minutes which equated to movements, but they could save on the RT by people cutting out the extra bits as well. We all do it. I know I do sometimes, but the more we can cut it down, the better. So, and then final question, Nigel, it's got to finish on one of Nigel's favorites. Nigel loves this one. Over to you, Nigel.
Okay, so last one of the night then, here we go. A controller, so we're talking about a full air traffic controller here, instructs you to land after a preceding landing aircraft, which is still on the runway. So this is a full controlled airfield we're talking about. Can you land, or when can you land? Is it A, when the preceding aircraft has vacated the runway width? Is it B, when the preceding aircraft has passed the runway holding points? Is it C, when you consider it safe to do so? Or is it D, you can't, you have to go around? So there we go. Land after is what you've been given by the controller. And let's have a look at your choices then. Okay, so well done again, most of you. It's when you consider it safe to do so. So this only applies to air traffic units, not air ground or AFIS. Air traffic can issue a land after instruction, interestingly, only during daylight hours when they consider there is enough space, the runway isn't contaminated, and the preceding aircraft doesn't stop or need to backtrack the runway. The decision to do so is still yours, the pilot. You do have the option to go around if you want to, but in this case, this is the sole occasion when you are allowed to land on an occupied runway. Okay, so back to Matt to wrap up.
Brilliant, thank you. We just got we've picked up loads of brilliant questions after we've gone through. We've got one final one from Cyril. Can we go through the difference between right base and left base again? So very quickly, right base is the base leg, but you're turning right onto finals. Left base is base leg, but you're turning left onto finals. Now, that may be conforming with the circuit direction. It may be against the circuit direction. So there has been some chat online, and we've had at some of our previous webinars as well, but you may be cleared to join by a controller. Say there's a left-hand circuit, runway 19 at Oxford, left-hand active circuit. Very, very often the controllers will instruct you to join right base. Now that's up to them, and that's up to them to fit you in and to sequence it as well. But you may be cleared to join on a base leg opposing the circuit direction. That's quite normal, and that's quite understandable at a controlled airfield if you're instructed to do that. You got any comments on that, Nigel?
Absolutely right. So if you instruct to do it, that's great. Some airfields don't like you doing it if it's not controlled. If you really want to and the traffic is light and there's not many people in the circuit and it's an option because it's more convenient for you, then you can. But just always be wary that if you start to join, the circuit in an area or at a position where it leaves you not much time, the likelihood of you forgetting to do any pre-land checks is pretty high. So, it comes with its own dangers.
And there's been a couple of questions about whether we need a CO detector at the moment. Legally, the mandate comes in from the 1st of January 2025, but you're strongly recommended to have one now would be our advice as well. Active devices that display the parts per million and are suitable and in accordance with the directive, you can obtain from online suppliers, people like Screwfix, £20–25 as well, and they're quite suitable. But I don't know what you've done in your club aircraft, Nigel, but some very strong Velcro or suitable mounting is highly recommended, and make sure you don't have it loose and flying around the aircraft. I don't know whether you've done that in your club aircraft already, Nigel.
We tend to bring them in at the end of the day. So we've got like a little net bag that we put them in along with the PLB, because we bring the PLBs in at the end of the day, because just in case anyone decides to go on a nicking spree at the airfield, they're all safely tucked up indoors. And of course, they're kept nice and warm out of the winter frosts and things during the winter months.
Yep. So different ways of doing it, whatever works for yourselves. So really, thank you everybody for your questions tonight. Let's just summarize. These are the takeaways there. I'll let you read them yourself, or those of you on replay can pause and have a look. There's some of our key things that we've discussed this evening. We hope that you've enjoyed. We hope you've been able to take something away, some things to think about from this evening. As a reminder, if there's anything you'd like to revisit, as I've said, a replay of this workshop will be sent to you via email, the link, and you'll get a list of some of the resources to support you that we've discussed this evening. Once we finish in a few minutes tonight, a survey will pop up in your window, and please take the time to fill this in, as your feedback genuinely is really valuable to us. This is how we improve these events, and also how we tailor future ones to things that are concerning you or that you're wishing to get more information on as well. If you're wondering what's next, keep an eye out for more details on our social media channels or through Skywise. I know actually is going to be some winter weather ones coming up with Simon, the weatherman, and Joe from the CA. They're always really, really good information in there as well, so look out for those as well. But for this evening, we've run out of time this evening. Big thank you to Nigel. Your input and experience in humour has been valuable as ever. And Sophie has been working tirelessly in the background, running all the polls and keeping Nigel and I on track, keeping the IT going. And it was Sophie's first one doing that this evening. She's done an absolutely grand job. So thank you and well done, Sophie. Thank you all for your engagement, your participation through the workshop as well. It's brilliant to see lots of you from all over the UK and even Europe, and to see the spread of experiences that you're bringing there as well. And, you know, we look forward to seeing more of you in future workshops. If you see us around airfields or out and about, please do come and say hello to us, and you know, catch up with us as well. And wherever you are, whatever you're doing, safe flying, and good luck if you're training or achieving new ratings and things as well. Thanks very much, everybody. Take care and good evening.